In Athens, Ohio, where Court Street meets Carpenter, stands a fortress defending a local history of the early 20th century. In 1909, the Ohio state government formed the Ohio Armory Board in an effort to assure the construction of National Guard armories across the state. In 1912, the Armory Board traveled to Athens, treated to a luncheon at the Berry Hotel from the community's most prominent figures, and the group discussed potential locations in town for a new armory site. Of the 4 lots considered, the city of Athens nearly offered up the famed Grosvenor House, but ultimately settled on a lot owned by the Athens Brick Company and used to mine materials for their famed bricks, a lot where Brooks Livery Stables once stood, at the north end of Court Street. This coming at a time the image of the National Guard began to change.
At this time, it was something of a luxury to be able to be in a National Guard company. The National Guardsmen had to purchase their own uniforms, give up their own time to drill, and the poorer working class couldn't afford these luxuries of, spending money on clothes they didn't need for daily life and giving up their time. So there was a perception that the National Guard was middle to upper class organization. After the Militia Act of 1903, the government provides more money to the states for upkeep of the National Guard. So they have to pay for less of their own equipment and actually get paid to go on week-long encampments and maneuvers.
Although the building opened in 1915, the official dedication took place in 1917 as the United States prepared to enter World War I. The Armory first housed Company L, 7th Regiment, Ohio National Guard.
We have soldiers who would have come in this building, and this may have been one of the last places in Athens County that they would have been in prior to going overseas for war, and some of them may have never made it back to the United States alive. And so this is a really important story to tell about Athens County's role, especially in World War I and World War II, and how local people played a role in the United States efforts.
Leading these men in the dedication parade was Major Samuel Morrow Johnson of Athens, Ohio. Major Johnson commanded Company L until the U.S. entered World War I. In 1917, he assumed command of a battalion of the 372nd Infantry Regiment, 93rd U.S. Division. And Clark Rice of Stuart, Ohio, enlisted that summer of 1917. And Philip Schloss of Athens, promoted private first class, then corporal, within a year. Corporal Schloss cheekily wrote of his experience in Europe, "Corporal until too much Bordeaux."
The armory itself is made of Athens bricks, so the material that was taken, that the Athens Brick Company took from this location, actually came back to this location in the form of bricks.
Yeah, that was called Shale Hill, and they mined the shale. The brick plant was right over where the Hocking Valley Bank is, and that whole neighborhood behind it was all brick kilns. So they ground up the shale. I would have thought that they dug up a bunch of clay. So whenever I plant a tree, I swear I'm always digging into clay to plant the tree. But that's not the kind of stuff they used to make the bricks. But this Carl Best apparently built armories all over the place. That was his specialty. They're all different, but he was into building armories, so.
Carl Best, the architect of the armory, built a majority of the state's armories at this time. When the Ohio State Armory Board formed in 1909, the 6-member board included Best as the state architect. By 1915, he'd constructed over 25 Ohio armories.
The narrow slits that are the windows are most likely an aesthetic architectural feature to mimic arrow slits in castles. This was not a defensive building. If Athens had ever been attacked in this era, there would not have been an Alamo-like stand at the armory. That's just not what it was meant for, and no one envisioned using it that way, so it would be purely aesthetic. The 1970s in Kent State, after the National Guard started to get a bad reputation, people naturally assumed that this building and this architectural style related some sort of oppression against communities, and it was not that. The intention was not that at all, and that, I assure you, had never crossed the minds of the people who were designing these buildings.
Beginning in the mid-70s, the National Guard began consolidating its armories, and talks began then to sell the Athens Armory to the city. The city of Athens purchased the building from the state in 1997.
So this room is what was, like I said, is the drill room. This would have been used for training for National Guardsmen as they prepared for military duty. It was also used for a lot of public functions. You can see that there's actual basketball hoops still in here. There would be pickup basketball games on weekends in here. It was used by Ohio University students for social events. They'd have dances and things like that, all the way back to the 40s and 50s. You can see right now we're using it for storage for the Honey for the Heart parade. There used to be, at the peak of the pitched roof here, there used to be a clear story, which had windows that opened up, and so the roof was like this, and then there was a clear story and then a small roof on top of that. And there was a lever system. You can still see the bar from that lever running parallel with the pitch of the roof, where you could crank this lever and that would open up all the windows to get air circulating.
This clear story was destroyed in a fire in 1952, yet the building remained in use for several decades.
Newspapers advertise a lot of organizations holding meetings in this space. There were boxing matches held here, even meetings of rabbit breeders here at some point. Basically, any organization that needed a public space could rent out the armory, and the National Guard encouraged this.
I used to play basketball there, played ball there a number of times. I didn't, but I went to school at what was called Mechanicsburg, which was out on Richland Avenue. But my wife went to school at Putnam, which was down at the base of Putnam Hill, which is what you'd know as the education school. And she went to dances there regularly. There were a couple of high school proms there that I recall happening.
It was a real community center at the time. That big open gymnasium, someone played basketball in there, but the big crowds went in for dances and things like that.
We're in an office on the second floor of the edifice of the armory, with a nice view looking south down Court Street. This is one of the buildings that would have been used by Ohio National Guard officers. Captain's office would have been behind us. This could have been his secretary or something like that, but this is not a space where enlisted men would normally be.
So this is the basement of the building. You can see, we call it the basement, but if you look, you can see through the windows. It's actually at surface grade. It certainly feels like a basement. We've gathered that this room here would have been used as the mezzanine or the magazine, which would have been where the National Guard would have stored any munitions they may have had, any guns or any or things like that. They may have stored them in this room. Look at these beams. Some of these beams, like you can't get beams like that anymore. We generally don't let trees even grow that big and that long to make lumber that strong. Yeah, so this room on the original blueprints that we have for the building, this would have been the Athens, the city of Athens Grand Army of the Republic chapter meeting room. The Grand Army of the Republic was a fraternal organization that was formed after the end of the Civil War for a place where Civil War veterans could gather together. And also, they provided some public service and a social opportunity for them. You can see, as I mentioned earlier, if you look at some of these bricks right here, it says Athena brick, salt glaze, Nelsonville, Ohio. So these would have been bricks that were that came from this region as well.
That's part of our challenge, is to recognize the value of these old buildings. Every old building tells 1,000 different stories about who built them, who designed them, who's worked in them, what are they made from, where did that material come from, how is that material a part of our landscape at one period of time, or how was it transported here if it was brought in from somewhere else. If the walls could talk, nobody'd be knocking them down then.
That is a space that in the future I see as being a place-making space. It could be a space to where we could host a concert on one evening, and the next evening we have a College of Fine Arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts, Masters of Fine Arts display space.
I think that the idea of using it as a place for performances sort of conflicts with the Arts West concept up here. And Arts West right now, it's my understanding, the city government has to subsidize it somewhat to keep it in operation.
Because of the drill room specifically, I think it is clear that that is best utilized as some sort of public space. We can't expect bringing this building back to be a significant drain on the city's budget. Ideally, we would have it being revenue neutral.
Get people in the building. Let them see it. Most people drive by it and never been in it. That would be a good start.